Hi there. Welcome to another episode of the Scalability Playbook. I'm your host, Debasish Mishra. With me is my co-host, Mike Park, and we are super excited to talk to you about a number of issues that have happened in the last month or so. And for those of you who are just joining in, Mike and I talk about what's real and what's hype in the tech industry, and how do you build things that are truly scalable and efficient from an operations perspective. Both of us have years of experience working in really complex global organizations where scalability is a problem. So we hope to help solve some of those problems, and we invite you to join us. If you like our podcast, please like, subscribe, share it, and certainly send us comments, because we'd love to know what else is on your mind that we can talk about. With that, let's get into it. Mike?
Hey, how you doing? So glad to be here. Love talking about this stuff. I like to have an opportunity to have the conversation. What's our first topic? What are we jumping into?
All right. Well, I think technology always changes. And you were just talking in the last episode, what's changed and what have you learned in the last month since we talked?
Yeah, it's always the old favorite statement, right? The only consistent thing we have is change, right? So
Absolutely.
we know change is going to come. What, I can't wait to see what tomorrow's going to bring. So this might seem like a silly thing, but for me, what I've noticed is I'm changing. So I've always been a big, how do I stay up to date? I'm a search guy, right? I'm going to go Google. So I Google, well, I Bing stuff. I'm a Bing guy. I know. I'm one of the 5 people that use Bing, but I prefer it as a player. But anyway, I would typically go and search. And to be honest, I think I'm really good at search. I've had people say, how'd you find that stuff? Because there's an art to it, right? There's a skill to how you can search. And I have finally realized I have made the tipping point now where I don't search anymore. I go to a Copilot or I go to ChatGPT. Because to me, it's gotten that good in terms of, again, there's an art to it. How do you put these prompts together and how do you ask it? So it might seem like duh to some people, but for me, I realize all right, I think I finally cut over that. That's my first step now. And let's see what the Copilot or the ChatGPT has to say. And then I'll go out to search or YouTube or some of my reference materials that I use. I'm a big O'Reilly fan. I have a service there. And that's where I'll go. But I'm starting now. I notice I'm my default now is Copilot. I don't know. That might seem a little silly, but to me, I notice I'm like, oh, I am changing. I am switching over. It is catching up. It is getting better. I think still not perfect, but that has been something I noticed just recently. So how about you? What are you gonna wow me with there?
I don't think I'm going to wow you. I think last time we spoke, I was diving into agentic AI and really looking at that. And I know that's one of the topics we're going to talk about later, but I have been spending a lot of time on no-code platforms that are leveraging or starting to lead the way in agentic AI. So I've been working with Make.com, with Relevance AI, and with N8N. I have no idea how you say that.
I think it's 8 and 8, right? I don't know how you
but that's right. 8.
It's 8 and 8, but it's the best of the 3. So anyway, go ahead. So
yeah, I have to agree, right? These are really interesting platforms, especially for somebody like me, where I don't have a development background. So what's been exciting is the ability to both create these agentic frameworks, which to your point requires a really good understanding of prompt engineering. So I would say similarly, I'm getting better at prompt engineering, but these AIs are limited in terms of what they can do. And the power is really when you can connect them to tools. And this is why I say Satya Nadella is wrong, because the tools are really what help drive the power of the AI, gives them capabilities. So what's exciting to me is the ability to pull this together without really having that much of a developer background. There's still some technical hurdles to jump, especially in terms of connecting the tools. And I think it's more intuitive for somebody who's a developer who has a background in seeing, these system error codes when you make a mistake. For me, it's much more challenging in that regard. But, I've been able to pull together some orchestrations. And I think what's interesting is just seeing the limitation. So to your point, I think 8 and 8 is excellent. I think it is very robust as a platform. it does have, I think, a higher technical hurdle for people who are not technical.
It's a
Um,
coder. I think you could tell it was developed by coders who knew, because there's that punch out to code capability whenever you get stuck, which I like, right? Because I can do that. So
yeah, and I think they actually build themselves as a developer's platform.
yeah. It's
But
open source. I can download it, run it local. It blows me away. It's all that node. It's like very cool. Okay, cool. But I'm going to be honest with you. What I love about it, because you're showing me the stuff you're doing. For me, they might look at that and go, "Oh, I feel threatened because that you're coming into my skill set." No, it's great, because what you're doing now is you're taking your strong business sense, your strong sense of scalability, and eventually ability to deliver value and design, and seeing some of the things that I face with it as the execution side of it. Oh, well, how are you going to do this? Yeah, that kind of drag and drop is nice, but I need more capability. It's a great synergy now of how we can, because sometimes it's hard for me to articulate to you what the challenges are. You're getting in there, and I go, "Oh, okay, I see. All right." So that's what I'm like too, is that discovery that you're getting into to say, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." Because a lot of this agentic AI, generative AI, it's very generalistic. And programmatically, we need to be very specific. Right? I need it to be, granular versus coarse. And this stuff is still very coarse. And your experience there, you're seeing that now as you're getting in there and say, "Oh, well, I want to stitch these two steps together." I always need that to be a 7. And if it's not always a 7, then how am I supposed to build guidelines, not rules? That, like my always is cheap, bring always is cheap, sometimes expensive. There it is in execution, right? So
absolutely. I think we should definitely talk about these different platforms in a later episode,
yeah,
just
I'd
in
love to
terms of
do
the
it.
differences, because I think this is going to be the place where there's going to be a lot of competition.
Yeah. It's impressive that the amount of work they put in, how robust. Like when I got ANA and they said it was open source, I thought, I'll look at it, it's like, wow, no, it's really robust and powerful. I'm blown away at how mature it was. And it's something I just found. That doesn't mean it wasn't out there long. I don't know how long it's been out there, but it hasn't been that long. It's really mature. It's really good.
Certainly, I agree with you. It's very surprising, especially because its primary competitors in the space that have been there for a long time are Make.com and then Zapier. And
Yeah, it's
I think
yeah,
when you look at those two platforms, comparatively speaking, they
yeah.
just don't deliver in the same way. So
Don't leave the behemoths out there. The Power Platform, right? Microsoft got Power Automate Desktop, and I've used those tools, and clunky, right? And it's the typical Microsoft. It's good and ain't great. And I think that's what Microsoft's always been. That here we'll do this, we'll put this out there, and then companies like this come along and go, "Oh, we're going to make that better. Oh, I've seen what you've done, but we're going to make this better." And that's why we get better code. I think, or better solutions, better apps.
definitely. Mike, we've talked about you being a developer by background, and the claims literally every week is how developers are going to go away because AI is going to come in and take those jobs. AI is going to code. AI is going to have this PhD level knowledge. So many claims about developers. And I know you've been tooling around in this space a little bit and have experimented. What's your take? Is that real?
Yeah, it might be real later, but it ain't real today. I don't think. I mean, it's still, it makes me a little apprehensive. We talked about this in one of our previous episodes. You made that bold statement, and I agree with you. One of these companies is going to get out over their skis, where they're going to deliver something. They're going to make a major faux pas that's going to be an embarrassment. It might even take them out. And I think, yeah, I'm seeing Zillow just released a fully built AI. Nobody did that. They let that build the app and they put it into production. Wow, that's, that. So imagine now you have to remediate that code. You're going to let the AI remediate the code? Because remember, where'd all this stuff come from? Basically, they ingested, and I know this is not true, I'm summarizing, but they took Stack Social, where we would go to as a program, how do I get better code? How do I figure stuff out? They kind of just put that, and they put a generative AI model around that, and that's what you're getting. I'm going to be honest with you. People could argue with me, but maybe 60% I get, but there's times where I'll get the code and go, well, no, yeah, that'll work, but that's a scale. That's, crash and burn. And once you take that and say run it 100 times versus the one time, that's what I've seen, that it's okay. It ain't good. It's like hiring a junior dev in, but now they're saying, go put the stuff go into production without any code reviews, any coding standards, there's a lot of assumptions that have been made to go to production. I don't think it's right. I think it scares me a little bit, but hey, more power to you if you make it work. I'd love to see how this Zillow app stands up over time, but I will tell.
Yeah, it's surprising to me, even not on the development side, when I look at use cases that are just normal creative type outputs. So the other day, as a joke on my daughter, I was bringing her some food and I was pretending I was Uber Eats. And I wanted to send her text messages to say, oh, your order is being processed and they're making your food and food's on the way, right? And so I thought I'd use generative AI to make the graphics that I could send her as a text, pretend I'm like the app. And I asked it to create the graphics for me. And actually, the first one that came out was really great, except that there were spelling errors. So I said, correct the spelling error. And then it basically abandoned the entire graphic and gave me a whole new graphic that was completely wrong. And I said, no, I don't want this. It gave me a picture of a phone that had like a Uber Eats type graphic on it. And I'm like, that's not what I wanted. Don't give me a photorealistic picture. Give me a drawing. So then it gave me a drawing of a phone with the app screen. No. And so the amount of tuning and retuning and tuning and retuning for something as simple, you would think, as a graphic, the amount of tuning and the absence of levers that give you control over, right? Because I want to say, keep this, but get rid of that. And it just doesn't have that intuition or judgment. And I can only imagine that's magnifying when it comes to coding.
100%. So so again, I've been doing this a long time, right? So, but we didn't even really fully fundamental, integrated development environments, like VS Code and Visual Studio and these types of tools. When S first came out, we got a thing called the telesense, where as you're coding, it would pop up and go, oh, you're writing an if statement, or you're right, and it would help an auto code for you. And like first thing I always do is turn it off. It annoyed the daylights out. But I remember the younger developers would come in and I would have it turned off and like, how are you doing that without IntelliSense? Because that's what they relied on. But again, I could always tell them too what the quality of the code was going to be because they struggled with solving problems. But I love the fact too, you're hitting the nail on the head for me when you say, I wanted to do this and I couldn't get repetition. I couldn't get standard. I couldn't get repeatability. So imagine as a coder, if I can't guarantee that that's always going to be that image and I can validate it, then the only way I could think to solve it would be I got to use AI to scale it out because, and I'm sure that'll happen over time. But right now in the world I'm in as a coder, how can I validate that I good quality results set back? Because I can't scale without foundational capabilities. I just can't do it.
So it's a great point, Mike, that the way that it's constructed today, or at least the demands that we're making on AI today are so broad that we can't get consistent results that are useful. But we've talked about potentially ways to make that happen. I think the promise of agentic AI is not that it tries to do everything, right? I think typically we're asking an AI to do 5 things, and those 5 things are inherently complex and require different sets of skills or different sets of knowledge. And so it's challenging. And I think that's why sometimes these things hallucinate or they deliver the wrong results. I've found better results in instead of one AI doing 5 things, I want 5 AIs each doing one thing. And we've talked about the promise of composability. Let's talk about composability and services in terms of how that drives scale. How do you think about that?
It's one of my favorite words, right? Because, composability, I say it all the time. We've got to become composable. And coming from the development side of the world, you'll hear people talk about microservices. And so when we had to break up the monolith, I myself have built the big monolithic app that did everything. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't. For those that don't know, I ran my own development shop for about 25 years where we built custom web solutions for people. And I think I was successful because I learned early on about composability. I'm not going to build this big app for you and then this big app for you. I need an authentication piece and I need a logging piece. So I started building these building blocks that I can then stitch together quickly to then deliver at scale. And that what I early on learned how to do that. And it's funny, I give the example to people sometimes, when we talk about architecture, right? So how do I take vision and strategy, get it to execution? I need architecture to do that. And people almost always use like an architect that architects a building. And I was at a conference and Wendy Keene, the business, I call her the mother of business architecture, right? She used your example from our last episode about the importance of design. Would you get into an airplane if you didn't think it was designed properly, right? So we need to be able to have that ability to say, was something designed properly? So the example I like to use people, not so much architecture of a building, but think about a restaurant. Think about how a restaurant can run at scale. You don't come into a restaurant, sit down and say, here's what I want. They hand you a menu and say, what do you want off this menu? Because they're designed in the back to take all the product, all the vegetables and the meats and the breads and everything. And they've got a design where they can quickly build and compose what it is you want. And who are some of the best composers out there? Ray Kroc at McDonald's, the guys that did Five Guys, they said, this is the scope of what we're going to deliver. This is how we compose, how we can compose at scale. So I like to use that. I think that works for people. Something like, oh yeah, because you tell that story of how, think about it this way. Don't think so much tech. Think about how we can build these pieces. So when you're building something, refactor it down to have this piece of it. And I think, because you've showed me this before, and I think you're spot on. Using these agentic AIs to be focused. This agent does this agent does this, and then you can orchestrate those to deliver whatever solutions you want. Now you can. That's my take. Does that make sense? Resonate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the notion of building blocks is a smart one, right? The way I would put it to people who are not technical is that imagine Lego bricks, right?
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to build something and it just came to you as one big piece, you would have that one thing and then you would never be able to do anything with it. Right. And we know, as we just talked about starting the episode, things change, right? We live in a world where the business changes, the market changes, the technology changes. That we can predict. So the notion that I can now break apart this thing into little tiny pieces and then reassemble it into something new and different is actually what gives you the flexibility and the adaptability for that change, right? So if I build something and it works and it's very, very small, I can take that one thing and now put it in a completely different configuration, right? So what we're trying to do, I think, is figure out what are those pieces, and whether it's AI or whether it's applications or anything else for that matter, how do we assemble it? I like the restaurant example because it's one that I use a lot. In fact, I just used it in my last job. Was we were doing a major transformation and we're trying to get 24 production units to all standardize on a singular enterprise process, because as you point out, always is cheap and sometimes is expensive. Because once we get to that single enterprise process, then I can automate it and reap the benefits of that automation. A lot of pushback from the business because they were looking, one was a daily news program and the other is a seasonal documentary series, right? So very different in terms of how they deliver their product, the pace of change that they're dealing with. But when you look at it from a process perspective, it's actually the same process. And so the example I used is actually Chipotle. I think Chipotle is hands down the most brilliant at coming up with how do you achieve enormous customization at scale. And the reason I say that is because if you walk into, and I just did this calculation, if you walked into any Chipotle today, take a wild guess how many distinct entree choices you could have.
Got to be in the millions because of the different, right? The parameters that are out there, right? Yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah,
gotta be
so you know the answer to this.
Yeah.
Most people, when I ask that question, will tell me around 100. Right?
Yeah, right.
If they walk in, they think it's about 100, but the actual number is over 12 million. Chipotle has been able to figure out the formula for how do you achieve enormous customization? How do you give a bespoke entree item to your customer while still standardizing how they do it? And they do have a standard. Like when you go in, the first thing you got to tell them is, what are you ordering? Are you ordering a burrito? Are you ordering a burrito bowl? Are you ordering, whatever those choices are? Then you go to the next stage. What's your rice? Right?
Yeah.
Couple of choices
Yeah.
there. Next stage. What's your protein? Few choices there. It's that standard model of approach from a
Yep.
process perspective, and then the options and the configurations.
Okay.
And I think this is actually the best way for any complex organization to deliver a process at scale in terms of trying to handle the variation between their businesses.
Yeah, it's funny because years ago I worked for all the big integration companies that was bought by an even bigger company and couldn't figure out what animal and it was an integration company. But anyway, I had a slide deck that walked me through that. I had, tomatoes and pickles and lettuce and here's how we do it. Now imagine if this was, authentication and business process and this business. So, rigor drives process brings value. So that's what we've got to be able to. And do one thing I want that always pops in my head, as old as new again. I'm a certified architect, right? A service-oriented architect. People go, oh, that's from 10, that's way old. We tried it, it didn't work. No, it's a set of principles. So I ask people, go back and look at the 8 principles that make up. So they're all based on, the last one is composability. They're still relevant today. They're great principles. I say to people, there's nothing new here. We're just trying to run at better scale today. What we've been doing 30 years ago, we're trying to do. So that's why I get excited about technology. Like, oh my God, how hard this is. I become the old man, right? I had to walk to school in the snow uphill and home up. I become that guy. We have to do. I get it, but I'm excited about it. I think it's really impressive if we embrace the scalable approach for composability. If we try to build these big monolithic AI things that do everything, you're going to fail. And just like you would if you did it in a traditional development methodology.
Yeah. Similarly, I got my start as an architect in the integration space. So I was a TIBCO trained architect. If you remember TIBCO. Right. So TIBCO was promoting the concept of the integration bus, right? So most enterprises were dealing with just a mess of point-to-point connections between their applications. And obviously, whenever you did upgrades, that had huge ripple effects because you had to fix all of the integrations. But the concept behind TIBCO was integrate to a singular point, to abstraction, or to use a really technical term, a canonical model. And then you only had to worry about that one connection point because you wouldn't break anything else. I think, to your point, that pattern still works from a scalability perspective.
100%.
And
so that would be a great topic, I think, for us to take, because I could talk for hours on the layered approach to how we build integration at scale. And to me, it's how do I take my data, put it under management, put it in a composable state so I can be agile. It's not rocket science. And if businesses can lean into it, I think they'd be shocked at how fast. And then what I'd like is this AI is really putting a lens on that, because to get that AI value, your data better be under management. And if your data is under management, it better be accessible in a scalable, the TIBCO, the ESB, the MuleSoft, the layered technology approach, how you get your data from system process to experience layers to consume. And then what we're maturing into even more, to get a little geeky here, is the EDA, right? Event-driven architecture. So instead of moving blocks of data, I just go event-orientated, and then AI will just explode with that capability. If we can get to an event-driven architecture and then let AI and these little micro-focused agents play off those events, now we'll have scale. Now we'll have truth. Yeah, it's exciting time. We can tip either way. I think we'll tip in the right direction personally, but we could tip either way. So
we're living in very uncertain times. People are talking about the market volatility, especially in the last few weeks. I imagine in most enterprises, the CFOs are freaking out because it's a little bit unpredictable in terms of how things are going. Certainly, if I were the CFO at a company, I'd probably be looking at how do I scale back our spending? How do we preserve cash just in case things really go south? And
what's a tariff? I don't like tariffs, right? That's consumed a lot of topics lately. So
100%. So in this kind of environment, in this climate of instability, and maybe the strategy may not be clear. I know I've certainly worked at a lot of companies where the business was not clear on what the company's strategy was. And yet you still have to operate in that environment. And so in that kind of instability or uncertainty in terms of, I don't know where the business is going, they're not able to articulate it to me. What do you do? How do you go after them?
Yeah. So my day job is I'm a chief architect for a mid-cap company. And I'm faced a lot of times with, well, wait, what's our strategy? We have a strategy. So whenever I find that there's lack of clarity on the strategy, my job is to make sure we communicate, we collaborate, we iterate, and then we reiterate. The number of times I'll be in a meeting and people start talking, well, stop. We have a strategy for this, right? And it's on my fingertips. I have a series of texts I can bring up whenever I have to. That's my job as the chief architect, to remind people, I don't need people inventing stuff here. We've got a strategy. Vision to strategy, execution, architecture gets us there. I can walk into any company and I can grab any person to walk by me and say, tell me what does work here. And they'll quickly tell me what doesn't work here. And I can ask the same question of, how would good look like to you? Say, oh, if we had AI, my job would be so much. I can get that conversation from anybody. What I never can get is, what should we do first? And what should we do next? And what should we do third? Right? I never can get that conversation. So that's my job, is to make sure not only we have the strategy, we have an execution plan that supports the strategy. Because guess what? We talk about composability and scale. And by the time I might get to the fourth step, I guarantee you that future state architecture is going to shift. The strategy is going to change. So we need to be agile and be able to pivot over to where we're going. So the job, I think, of the chief architect in an organization is to hold that North Star, hold that vision of strategy, and make sure the execution plans are still aligned. Reiterate, collaborate, communicate, and make sure everyone knows, wait, don't invent here. We know where we're going. And if you're telling me it's changed, let's come back together, because I thought we had a strategy, because strategies are different than planned, right? I need a strategy. Let's keep my plan. If you're saying the plan's changing, whoa, is the strategy changing too? So just keep driving that iterative approach and foundation. People say, Milton, you say the same thing over and over again. I know, it's by design. It's by design. So how about you? How do you handle it? You've been in that role more than I have. So
Yeah. And it's surprising how often there is not an articulable business strategy. Now, I've certainly developed techniques to try and extract the business strategy from those stakeholders to make sure, to your point, that we have a North Star. But I've definitely also operated in places where there is no North Star, or it's going to take time to go figure it out. And yet we've got to go make investment decisions. And so I think it goes back to, again, how do we start this conversation, is recognizing that things change, right? The world is a changing place. We can't predict how the business will change. We can't predict how the technology will change, but we can predict that it'll change. When I look at the system architecture, is it designed to change? Because more often than not, it's not been designed that way. It is inflexible. There is technical debt sitting on the books. And so what I'm going to do in the absence of a business strategy is try and figure out, how do I retire the technical debt and start to infuse more flexibility in the architecture of the systems, so that when the business finally figures out its strategy, or, when things are more clear, that we're going to have a much shorter, much faster path to adapt, because we've built in some of that flexibility into the architecture and we've killed off the technical debt.
So it's funny. So I don't know if you remember this. Years ago, you and I crossed paths at the CIO conference down in New York City. I don't know if you remember this, but one of the best stories I ever heard. And I wished I could remember the CIO that told the story. But he said, he goes, I'll walk around. This is back before COVID, when you would walk around and see people all in the office. He goes, if I saw a group of IT people in a meeting room, he goes, I might pop into that room and say, okay, guys, what's the business value for this meeting? What's the value of why you're meeting? And if they couldn't articulate, it would typically get, oh, we're upgrading service now, or we got a patch for SQL Server, talking about how we're going to roll it out. He goes, yeah, but what's the business value? Why are you doing it? What's the business reason? They couldn't articulate that. I might break the meeting up. So it got to the point where, okay, we're going to call tech guys, you're calling a meeting. Okay, but what's the business value? So he was changing culture just by walking around, and we're not bringing tech in for the sake of tech. We're not using AI for the sake of AI. It has to be aligned to what is the business value. So that implies the organization can clearly articulate, what is that business value? What is the strategy? What are we trying to achieve? So this is where it's important for leadership to be able to pound that home. And I keep the corporate values of any organization I work for in the appendix of my slides. So if I ever have to, when we start getting up there, well, guys, remember the value, we were going to be sustainable and increase profit or whatever those values are, be a good member and help our employees. Don't go against our values. Right? Keep that state of mind. That's what the strategy is to deliver. And if there's a gap there, then let's get leadership together and close the gap. Maybe it's a communication problem. Maybe it's misalignment. But let's call it out. We have an issue. Let's fix the issue. So I like to call it out. We all know why we're doing this here, right? We're not doing tech for the sake of tech. We're doing tech to drive value.
100%. Yeah. I think there are great tools that IT can use to help get it from the business. I know somewhere on the internet there's a article I did about something called a strategy on a page, which was something I used when I worked in the software industry to help, because that particular company was not good at that time.
There's that tool out there, the business canvas, right? Did you ever see the business canvas? It's a
No.
great tool. It puts everything. It's like a one page. So I've worked on a bunch of these like large innovation stage gated things, and they're so heavy with, stage gate approvals and alignment orchestration. So when this business canvas model came out, it's got a place for value and vision and memory. It's a great one, but take a look at it. Maybe we'll explore that sometime. It's a great business to execution strategy alignment. Everybody, that's what we're doing. Remember, this is the definition of everything we're doing. I think it's critical. I always say this a lot of times. We have to have absolute definitions. You know how many times someone will say, well, that's too slow, or that's too cheap, that's too expensive. I don't know what that means. I need relative data for you to tell me I'm going to spend $1 million, but I expect to get $30 million in return. That might be good. But if I spend $1 million and get 1.5 million in return, well, that's expensive. But I need data to be able to tell me an absolute definition of what our success is, how we measure. A lot of times people talk about goals and objectives. To me, a goal is I want to lose weight. An objective is I'm going to bring in 2,500 calories because I need my measurable weight. It's measurable. I can achieve it. So having everybody on the same page of what we mean and understand the definition, we're all pointing in the same direction. I think that's important. So when I see there's gaps and we don't know what the strategy is, we got a communication problem to see. We're usually where I start, right? Let's get everybody communicating together. And then we'll scale up and go out and what are the other issues?
I think the conversation about how IT can communicate effectively with the business to really understand goals is one that we want to explore more in another episode. But going in the other direction, as we think about how do we know if somebody is good at technology, right? There are lots of skills and a lot of technologies. And, candidly, for somebody who's trying to figure out what's the technical team that's going to get me there, how do I know if my technology person is any good?
Yeah. So it's always fun. I've always used the rule of thumb that I'm not so interested in your technology skills. I want to know what your soft skills are and your execution skills. I can teach someone to code in Python. I can't teach someone to ask for help. Right. So I used to have a rule of thumb in my business. I would say to my team, if you're at your desk and you're facing a problem and I would have a guy that would spend he goes, I've been working on this problem for 3 days. I go, you're killing me. You're wasting my company's money. Get up, walk around and go ask for help. So it was best guy I ever had. I had this, he was a late in life math professor, right? He could code, but not production. But he wanted to change. He was ready for something different. I hired him in. He was awesome because he knew how to ask for help. He knew how to explain his problems, but he knew how to stay in his lane, how not, but when he started to drift out of his lane, he knew to ask for help. And he was instrumental in me mentoring raw programmers that knew how to code really well, but he polished them in, giving them that balance of business and technical skills. So to me is I can find a coder. I can find a solution designer. Can I find someone that can speak the language and get that business value alignment? I have fired many a talented programmer and seen the confused look on their face, and I'm letting them go because they're like, I'm an awesome programmer. I know, but you're not helping me deliver value. If you can learn how to do that, come back and work because you are a talented programmer, but you're no good to me. Be in my scalable environment and work as a team member to deliver value. So that, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I use it. Sure. It's not so much the technical side. It's that soft skill side.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an essential skill that has to be taken into account. especially in a, a large team that's trying to deliver results. For me, because again, I'm not a developer, so I don't have that background, right? So
I don't hold it against you. I don't hold that against.
I appreciate that. It's funny. I'm actually pretty good at picking out folks. I have a very specific criteria. So I don't think that deep knowledge of a particular technology is an indicator of whether somebody is good at technology, because the technology changes. And so that technology that is very vibrant and active now may not be in 5 years, in which case I may not need that skill. That doesn't mean that the person is bad, but that's what I need to figure out. I'm trying to figure out, are they good at technology, or are they just good at that one technology?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
when I interview, I'm always asking tell me about a technical problem that you solve. And I use that to understand several things, I think, both on the soft side as well as the technical side. The first is, can they explain what the problem is that they're trying to solve from a business perspective? Because to your point, if you don't understand the technology association with the business and the business problem you're trying to solve, that's a problem to me, because it means you don't necessarily know what is the value of what it is you're doing and how to prioritize. So I want to hear that they can articulate that, and articulate that reasonably well. Then I want to understand both the technical problem and then the technical solution options, right? As we both know, there is multiple ways to solve the problem, right? You can solve any technology problem easily. There's 100 ways to do it. But what I want to hear is, what were the solution options looking at, and what were the pros and cons of those approaches from a technical perspective? And when I hear somebody who's able to articulate that, and articulate it well, that's when I really see that they understand the technology and the trade-offs that they're making between the different choices. And that tells me that they're thinking deeply about those choices and what they get out of it. And especially, I appreciate it when I hear somebody thinking about not just the functional aspects of those choices, but then the operations aspects, right? If somebody tells me, well, we didn't go in this direction because we would have scalability problems, or, there'd be a maintenance issue, maintainability problem. That's when I'm like, okay, that's the person I want, because they're thinking about the holistic life cycle of the technology solution.
100%. It's funny because over the years, I've developed this methodology for solution design. It's actually fairly rigorous, and I've used it with a lot of teams, and I love that the teams embrace it. I have this. So first, we're going to get our principles published, like architectural principles, data principles, application development principles, and we're going to evolve them over time. But we got a mechanism for documenting and understanding what our principles are. Next, I have them establish what's our position. And my poster I used to be blockchain. Like, what's our position on blockchain? It's a slow database. Why do we, right? And we're truly had trusted, like, what's the value bring? So establish what that position is. Next is the approach. What approach are we going to take? And that's for those key decisions. I have a decision document, not an architectural decision record. We'll build one of those. I want a decision document that says, we could have done it this way, we could have done it this way, or we're going to go this way, pros and cons, and weigh it out. Because you know how it is. 6 months from now, someone comes back, go, why didn't you do it this way? So you capture in context of what that is. I've had great success putting that. It's not overly rigorous. And whenever I have a solution architect or a tech lead in the architectural space say to me, I'm swamped, I can't get anything done. I go, well, show me your framework on how you're doing solution design. I don't have. Yeah, we've got to get our thought process, our solution design process under management. Put a little bit of rigor again. Rigor change process, creating value. Because it goes back to what we talked about before, the importance of design. Design is critical, that we know we're all lined up, the strategy, the design, to get the execution. If we don't have that traceability, we're all on the same page, you're going to struggle, right? And finding people that buy into that and lean into it. It's not just I'm a good coder, because I can code and bring value to the organization. That's what I'm looking for. That's the person I'm looking for. All right. So to me, this is a great conversation. I think if you kind of summarize what we did, we talked about one of my favorite topics. How do we have composability to deliver at scale through agility by bringing good talented people and to evaluate, are they fit into this machine that you're trying to build? And whether you use it, AI, we talk about blockchain and integration, all this stuff, that's all technology. how do you deliver value at scale? And that's why I love these conversations we have. It kind of reiterates that's how we do it. That's how organizations can be successful. Technology aside, because the technology is going to change, but be composable, be scalable, and that'll get you where you need and driven that value. So this has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed this. I'm looking forward every time we do this. I enjoy it. So
Thanks. Yeah, it's been fun for me too. I think next episode is going to be really great. We're going to talk about enterprise architecture because I think architecture, which is essentially about design, is a big topic and discipline for how you get good at this. And it's a topic that is very controversial. There's a lot of debate over it because nobody's really figured out the magic formula for how you do architecture well with consistency and results, which is obviously something we care about. So we hope you enjoyed the show. If you have comments, please send them in. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about it. This is our third one, so we're really enjoying it. We hope you are as well. Like, subscribe, share it if you do think it's valuable. We certainly appreciate it. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.
Thanks.